Hi everyone, yasas que kalos to another episode of Dimitra's Dishes. Today we're going to be making a bulgur and lentil pilaf. It's a traditional Middle Eastern dish known as Mujadara, and it's usually made with rice, but we're going to be using bulgur wheat today. I feel like it's a little more hearty, tastes so delicious. It comes together in under an hour, and it's a great side dish to serve with anything. Fish, meat, you could even eat it as the main course. I also like to eat it for breakfast with some fried egg on top. So yummy and delicious and perfect for Lent if you're fasting and you want a vegan option. Let's get started. Okay, so we're going to begin by slicing the onions. These are going to get caramelized and they're going to go on top of the pilaf. So you're going to need 3 large onions, and you can cut more if you like more onions on there. You could actually make a bigger batch than this. These keep well in the fridge, and you could put them on top of anything. They add so much flavor. So cut each onion in half and then thinly slice it. Okay, so add the onions to a large skillet. It's preferable that you put it in a wide skillet so that way they brown evenly. And we're going to begin this over medium-high heat. Add plenty of olive oil to this. I would say at least 1/3 cup. You could even add a little bit more if you like. And then I also like to add a hefty pinch of salt, about a 1/2 teaspoon or so. And we're going to begin this, like I said, over high heat, medium-high heat. Once they start to cook, then go ahead and reduce the heat to a medium and continue to stir them until they're golden brown. That's going to take about 30 minutes or so. So now, to a saucepan, go ahead and add about 4 or 5 cups of cold water, 1 cup of lentils. Now, I'm using these lentils right here. These are green, small lentils. They don't mush the way the brown ones do, but you can use brown ones. Any brown or green lentils will work for this. I'm also going to add a little bit of salt and 1 bay leaf. So I'm going to let the lentils come to a boil and cook for 15 minutes. So right after you drain the lentils, go ahead and add them back to the pot with 1 cup of bulgur wheat. I use the medium fine, which is number 2. You could find bulgur wheat in your Mediterranean or Middle Eastern grocery food store. So go ahead and add that to the pot with 2 cups of either vegetable stock, chicken stock, or water, whatever you prefer. I also like to season with some salt and pepper. I added 1.5 teaspoons of salt and a good amount of black pepper and a 1/2 teaspoon. You can go all the way up to 1 teaspoon of ground cumin. Mix that all up. Bring the mixture to a boil. Once it comes to a boil, reduce it to a low. Cover the pot and let it simmer for 20 to 25 minutes. So my onions caramelized in about 20-25 minutes, around the same time. Actually, they were done a little bit before. The pilaf was ready, so I took them off of the heat and I just set them aside so that way they can cool a little bit. While the bulgur and lentils were cooking, I went ahead and I chopped up a little cucumber salad. I just took an English cucumber and I peeled it, roughly chopped it, put it in a bowl and squeezed some lemon juice on it, threw a little bit of parsley on top, finely chopped parsley, a little bit of salt, some olive oil, and just toss that all together. You can use mint instead of the parsley, but since we're going to top the pilaf with the parsley, I just use that because that's what we're using anyway. Once the bulgur and the lentils are ready, mine took 25 minutes, I just went ahead and I tossed them and then I transferred it into my serving platter. Topped it with the caramelized onions. I even used all of that olive oil because there's so much flavor in that, and put it on top of the bulgur and the lentils as well. Sprinkled some fresh chopped parsley on top, and I also put a few lemon wedges on the side, and it is ready to serve. Now this is really all you need. You could eat this as a meal, but you can serve this alongside lamb, chicken, fish, whatever you like. Time for the taste test. And I like to serve it with a little dollop of yogurt and the cucumber salad. So much flavor. Those caramelized onions are everything on this. They add a little bit of sweetness. We're going to be making Arakas Laderos and patates, which is basically green pea and potato stew. It translates to that in Greek. And this is one of the dishes in the category known as ladera. Ladi in Greek is oil, and they're just usually made with lots of olive oil. But we toned it down here because I know that most people are watching calories and things like that, so you can adjust it when you're making it at home. This is so delicious, and it's served as a main dish in Greece, but it's perfect as a side. It goes well with everything. Seafood, beef, lamb, chicken, pretty much everything. It's delicious and so simple to make. Let's get started. Okay, so we're going to begin by finely chopping an onion. This onion seems really big, even though I could use it because I ended up making a bigger batch, but I'll just use some of it and save the rest for another recipe. Finally chop it and add it to the pot with lots of olive oil. You can go up to a half a cup of olive oil because this is a dish that comes from the group of dishes known as ladera in Greek, which are dishes that are really made with lots of olive oil. But you could do a quarter cup or a little bit more. I'll leave it up to you. Cook the onion until it's nice and soft and golden. In the meantime, prepare all of the remaining ingredients. So you can add 2 potatoes to this, or you could leave the potatoes out. I'm adding a few more because, like I said, I'm making a little bit of a bigger batch. Peel the potatoes, clean them really well, and then dice them into medium-sized pieces. This size is really good so that way the potatoes don't melt. I have diced them smaller in the past and they kind of melt into the sauce, which is also nice because it makes the sauce thicker, but I prefer this size. I'll also dice up these baby carrots around the same size as the peas. If you have big carrots, you can slice them into bigger rounds. That's totally fine. And then you're going to need crushed tomatoes for this. You could use canned crushed tomatoes. A 15-ounce can is going to be enough, or around 1 pound. But I do have these fresh tomatoes here that I'm just going to grate over my box grater and then just set them aside in this bowl. Once the onion is ready, we're going to add 3 cloves of grated garlic and just warm it through for a few seconds until it's nice and fragrant. The carrots and the potatoes are going to go in, season them with some salt and freshly cracked black pepper. The tomato sauce is also going to go in at this time, and we're just going to mix it up and cook it for a few seconds. Next, we're going to add the peas. So you could add 1 or 2 pounds of peas. I'm adding 2 pounds of frozen peas. These are frozen, like I said. They're not thawed out at all, but you can use canned if that's what you have. That will work as well. Add the peas to the pot. Season them also with some salt and black pepper. I also like to rinse out the tomato bowl with a cup or 2 of water. Maybe if you're making a bigger batch, 2 cups of water would be better, so that way you'll end up with a little bit of sauce. Bring the mixture to a boil. Once it comes to a boil, reduce the heat to medium, put the lid on, and let it cook nice and slow for about 25 to 30 minutes, or until the sauce thickens and the potatoes are fork tender. They should be really nice and soft. And at this point, I'm just going to finally chop some fresh dill. Fresh dill is really nice in this dish. It goes really well with the peas. Finally chop about 1 to 2 tablespoons of it. Add it to the pot with about a teaspoon of dried mint. If you have fresh mint, you could do that too. It really adds depth of flavor. Mix it all up, and you can taste the sauce at this time to see if it needs more salt or pepper. Mine is looking a little bit dry, so I'll add a little bit more water. I do want there to be a little bit of a sauce. And as the dish sits, the potatoes, you know how potatoes are, they like to soak up all of the liquids. So you do want there to be a little bit of a sauce, like I said before. So you can add a little more water and just warm it through, and it'll be really nice when you serve it. You can serve this as is or topped with feta and olives with some nice toasted bread on the side to soak up those delicious, saucy, juicy bits. This is so good, and it's ready to serve. So once it's ready, it is best to wait a few minutes before you serve it, because as it sits, the sauce gets thicker. This tastes even better the next day, but when you go to reheat it, you're going to see that most of the sauce will be pretty much absorbed by the potatoes. So you can add a little bit of broth to it or water and just warm it through nice and slow before you serve it. So that way there's some sauce in there for you. It's just so good and it's just very delicious. So this is the tomato version, but you can make it lemony by leaving the tomatoes out, adding about a quarter of a cup of lemon juice, and instead of the onion, you could do 5 or 6 scallions to this. You can add some artichokes. That's a nice combination. It's just so good both ways, but the tomato one is a little bit more comforting if you ask me. Time for the taste test. And when you slice into it, you'll see that the potatoes literally melt, the potatoes and the carrots, but the green peas aren't mushy, so that's good. So good. I love the combination of dill with the green peas. The mint, you can taste it a little bit in the background. It's nice and fresh. We're going to be making Lagana bread, and this is a Greek bread that's soft on the inside, crispy and crunchy on the outside. It's topped with lots of sesame seeds. If you don't like sesame seeds, you can leave them out and top it with your favorite herbs, but we'll talk about that later. And then it's usually served on Clean Monday, which is Kathara Deftera, and that's the beginning of Orthodox Lent, but it's so good you'll be making it all year round. Let's get started. Okay, in a large bowl, go ahead and add 4 cups of all-purpose flour or bread flour, whatever you have on hand, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, and whisk it all together and set it aside. And then in my tabletop mixer, I'll add 1.5 cups of lukewarm water, 2 teaspoons of granulated sugar, and 1.5 teaspoons of active dry yeast. Mix that all up, and then you can attach the dough hook attachment to your mixer. Let this mixture sit for about 8 minutes or until you see a foamy cloud appear on the top. That's how you know your yeast is good and it's active and it's going to make the dough rise. If this does not happen, then you're going to have to throw this out and get a new container of yeast and start all over. Next, I'll add 1/4 cup of olive oil to my mixture and then all of that flour. This is going to knead on low speed for about 10 minutes, and then we'll transfer it into the same bowl that the flour was in, or a bigger bowl. You want it to have lots of room because it's going to double in volume, but make sure you grease the bowl well with some olive oil. Put that dough in there and toss it around. Cover it with plastic wrap or a clean kitchen towel and set it aside to rise until it's doubled in volume in the warmest room of your house. Once that happens, then we're just gonna cut this into 2 equal portions. If you like a thicker bread, then you don't have to cut into 2 portions. You could roll it out as 1 flatbread, but I'll just make 2 today. Each portion is just gonna be rolled out really lightly. I'm using a rolling pin. You can use your fingers if you like. This is a nice rustic bread. It should be somewhat in the shape of a rectangle or some kind of an oval, around 9 by 13 inches. You can use parchment paper if you buy it pre-cut like I do. These are half-sheet parchment papers, and you can just kind of measure it by putting the parchment paper on it, and you'll know if you have the right size or not. There's really no wrong way to make this. You can make this smaller or bigger if you like. These are going to go onto trays that are lined with parchment paper, and then we're going to cover them loosely with a clean kitchen towel for about 30 minutes or 40 minutes or until they've puffed up and almost doubled in volume. Once the dough has puffed up, then you're going to want to use your fingertips to press into the dough to create the characteristic pinched look of the Lagana bread. We're going to brush the dough with some water, and you can sprinkle the top with either sesame seeds, your favorite herbs. You can definitely put some olives on this. There's so many ways you can decorate it, but we're doing the classic way today, and something that's not very traditional. I didn't have white sesame seeds, but I do have this everything bagel seasoning that has different types of sesame seeds in there and some seasoning like garlic and salt and things like that. So I'll sprinkle some of that on one and just put the black sesame seeds on the other one. This is going to bake at 425 degrees Fahrenheit. The oven is already preheated for about 15 minutes or until the bread is nice and golden. Let the bread rest for another 8 to 10 minutes and then it's ready to serve. And just like that, our Greek flatbread is ready, and it is crispy and smells delicious. I cannot wait to taste it. You can leave the sesame seeds out if you're not a fan of sesame seeds, even though that's the characteristic topping of this Lagana bread. But if you don't like them, you can, and some of my kids do not like sesame seeds at all. You can put your favorite herbs on top. You could even put some olives and sun-dried tomatoes like I did in another recipe that I'll post down below is another version of this. You can decorate it like a garden-inspired flatbread, and I did do a recipe on that too. There's so many ways to do it, but this is my favorite way, the most simple and traditional way. So good. I love the one with the everything bagel seasoning. It wasn't something I was planning to top this with, but I completely forgot to check and restock my regular white sesame seeds. It's so good though because it's salty, has all those delicious flavors. If you live outside of the US and you've never heard of this, it's basically, I'll read you the ingredients: sesame seeds, salt, garlic powder, onion powder, black sesame seeds, and poppy seeds. That's all it is. So if you just use regular sesame seeds and combine a little bit of garlic powder and onion powder, you'll pretty much get the same flavor, and lots of salt too. It's so delicious, so good, so simple. This bread tastes good with everything, but of course with dips like tzatziki, hummus. My favorite thing to serve this with is some olive oil and balsamic oil and roasted garlic. I did a dipping oil recipe a few months back. I'll post that down below too, so that way you can get that one. I have another vegan classic Greek dish for you known as Spanakorizo. Spanakorizo really translates to lentil rice. It's a lentil and rice pilaf that's great as a main course because, as we all know, lentils are loaded with nutrients, so you could totally eat this as a main course. You could also serve it as a side. Great if you're fasting for Lent or if you're avoiding meat in general. Let's go over the ingredients so we can get started. I have a cup of dried uncooked lentils, salt, black pepper, a bay leaf. These are some canned diced tomatoes. You can also use fresh tomatoes and just chop them up. A cup of basmati rice that's soaking in cold water. Some kalamata olives that we're going to use as a garnish, along with some lemon wedges, olive oil, fresh parsley. I have a small onion here that I've roughly chopped and 2 garlic cloves that have been grated. So I'm going to add my lentils to boiling hot water, and I'm going to season them with a little bit of salt. And I'm going to add the bay leaf in there. Let them boil for 15-20 minutes or until they're not fully cooked. You want them to still have a bite to them because they are going to continue to cook with the rice. Once they're done, once 15 minutes have passed, go ahead and drain them, but reserve a cup of the lentil water because we're going to use that to cook the rice in later on. Go ahead and drain them and set them aside. So while the lentils are cooking, I'm going to go ahead and cook my onions with the olive oil. So I'm going to add about a 1/4 cup or more of olive oil, add however much you like. In Greek dishes that are cooked with olive oil and they're vegan, they usually go heavy on the olive oil, but you can add as much as you want. Let the onions cook over medium heat until they're nice and soft and golden. That's going to take about 10 minutes. I'm also going to season them with a little bit of salt. Next, we're going to go ahead and add the garlic and just stir it so it can warm through just a few seconds. Once you smell it, it's pretty much ready. Then we're going to add the diced tomatoes and just cook it down for 2-3 minutes over high heat so that way the liquid from the tomatoes can evaporate. Season them with a little bit of salt. And I also like to add just a pinch of sugar just to cut the acidity of the tomatoes. You can leave it out if you don't want it, or you can add some honey instead. That looks good. Now we're going to add the rice. Now, before I added the rice, what I did was I rinsed it under cold water until the water ran clear. Now, you could do this in a strainer, or you could just do this in a big bowl and just keep rinsing the rice out. Then let it soak for 10 to 15 minutes in cold water. Drain that water out, add the rice. Now we're going to season with a little bit of salt, some black pepper, the reserved water. This is a cup of water from the lentils. And I'm also going to add the cooked lentils. I'm going to bring the mixture to a boil, then I'm going to reduce the heat to low, cover the pot, and I'm going to let this simmer for 15 minutes or until the rice is perfectly cooked and tender. Then I'm going to go ahead and fluff everything up and it'll be ready to serve. After 15 minutes, you'll see that you'll have the most beautiful pot of lentil rice pilaf ready. It's going to smell amazing. It's going to look beautiful. Now go ahead and finally chop some fresh parsley, sprinkle it on top. Serve this with some kalamata olives, some lemon wedges, and if you're not worried about keeping it vegan, feta cheese goes so good with this. An extra drizzle of extra virgin cold pressed olive oil would also be really good. This smells amazing. I have to give it a taste. This is so good. The lentils are perfectly cooked. The rice is so flavorful. Salt is just perfect. The little bite of tomato in it just adds a nice tang. You can definitely add some more vegetables to this. It's not traditional, but carrots would be really good in this. You could saute some mushrooms and put it in here. Some caramelized onions on top would be absolutely amazing. Today, I'm going to be teaching you how to make a classic Greek side dish known as patates yakhni. It's a really quick and easy potato stew that you can have ready on the table in like an hour or less. And it's just made with very simple ingredients like potatoes, onions, tomato, a few herbs. You probably have everything in your pantry to make it. You probably already have everything in your pantry to do this recipe, so let's get started. Okay, we're going to begin by finely chopping an onion and adding it to a pot with a little bit of olive oil, and this is going to cook over medium heat until the onion is nice and soft and golden. And that should take about 8 minutes or so. So in that time, you can go ahead and peel your potatoes. You can use russet potatoes for this or golden potatoes for this. Now the recipe calls for about 5 medium to large potatoes, but these are a little bit smaller, so I'm doubling it up and adding, and I didn't even count them. There's about 8 here. Peel these and then cut them into cubes. This is the size that you're looking for. Set them aside. Once the onion is nice and soft, this got a little bit too dark in some areas, but it'll be totally fine. We're just going to add 2 garlic cloves that are grated. Warm that through just for a few seconds until they're nice and fragrant. And then add the potatoes to the pot with 16 ounces of grated canned tomatoes, or you can grate fresh tomatoes if you'd like. 2 to 3 allspice berries. This is what they look like. We can season this with some salt and freshly cracked black pepper, a teaspoon of dried oregano, a little bit of crushed red pepper flakes if you like them. And then we're going to add enough water so that the potatoes are almost covered. Now, if you're using canned tomatoes, you can add a little pinch of sugar to this or some honey just to get rid of that acidity. So about a teaspoon is what you would start with. And then once the meal is cooked, you can taste it and see if it needs a little bit more. Mix this all up and let it come to a boil. Once it comes to a boil, reduce the heat to a low, cover the pot, and let this simmer on low heat for about 30 minutes or until the potatoes are fork tender. Give everything a nice mix. The sauce will have thickened. You can taste it at this point and see if it needs more salt, if it needs another little pinch of sugar. But if it's all good, then the meal is ready. All we need is to garnish this with some fresh parsley, and it's ready to serve. And there you have it. Just like that, the potato stew is ready. The whole thing was about an hour from start to finish, probably a little bit less. This is a delicious side dish that goes well with everything. You can also serve it as a main course with some boiled eggs or maybe fried eggs or poached eggs on top. I put eggs on almost all my veggies. I love them. But it's definitely one of those very simple dishes that packs lots of flavor. And the potatoes are so tender. The fork just slides right through them. So good. That tomato sauce got a little bit sweet. It's rich and thick. The potatoes absorbed all that delicious flavor. Of course, I recommend to serve this with some feta and olives on the side for a complete meal. Is a meal even complete without feta? I love it. I pretty much put it on everything. I'm going to teach you how to make semolina halva. This is a traditional Greek recipe that's usually made during Lent because it's completely vegan if you take out the honey. But we'll get to that in a little bit. It's so comforting and delicious, and I make it all year round because everyone loves it. Let's get started. Okay, so we're gonna begin by making the syrup. So in a saucepan, I'm gonna add 2 cups of granulated sugar, a cinnamon stick, 4 whole cloves, the peel of a lemon, or you can do the peel of an orange instead, and 4 cups of water. This is all going to come to a boil, and as soon as the sugar dissolves, turn the heat off, stir in 1 cup of Greek honey or your favorite honey and a teaspoon of pure vanilla extract, and that's it. The syrup is ready. In my wide saucepan over here, I like to do this in a wide saucepan, but keep in mind that it is going to pop everywhere for just a few seconds. So just make sure that the saucepan that you're using is really deep. I'll add 1 cup of light olive oil or your favorite vegetable oil, 2 cups of semolina flour. Traditionally, we use half coarse and half fine, but all I have is fine semolina, and that's gonna work perfectly, so don't worry about it. And we're gonna toast this over low heat for about 10 minutes or until the semolina starts to get a beautiful toasted aroma and it starts to get a nice golden color. The last 3 minutes of toasting the semolina, I'm gonna go in and I'll add some sliced almonds. I just soak these almonds in some water and I peel the skins off, and then I just slice them with a knife in half. And I'm just gonna put them in right now so that way they can get nice and toasted for about 3 minutes. This is the color that you're looking for. Once this color is achieved, you can add dried fruit if you like it. I love adding cranberries to this, but today I'll add some raisins. About 3/4 to 1 cup of your favorite dried fruit can go in here. I'm gonna add a little more lemon zest. I'll also add half a teaspoon of ground cardamom powder and 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. This is all gonna get mixed together and cooked over low heat for about 2 to 3 minutes longer. Now it's very important to turn the heat off while you add the syrup, because even while the heat is off and the pan is hot, once the syrup goes in, it's gonna bubble vigorously. So keep your hands far away from the pot because that steam is super hot. Pour the syrup through a strainer to catch all those cloves and cinnamon and the lemon peel that's in there. Pour all of the syrup in there, and once it stops bubbling, you can turn the heat back on. Cook this over medium-low for about 5 to 10 minutes. The halva is ready once all of the syrup is absorbed and it starts to release from the pan. You're gonna see that you can just slide the spatula through it and you'll be able to see the side of the pan. It's not gonna stick anymore. That's how you know it's done. And now again, it depends on the heat that you're using, but it took mine about 5 minutes. I have made this before on other stovetops where it took 10 minutes, but this is the consistency you're looking for. You can transfer it now into any mold, small molds or large mold. I love to put it in a bundt pan. I don't grease the pan or anything like that. Just make sure that you compact it in there so that way there are no air bubbles. If you have air bubbles in, what's gonna happen is it's gonna crumble when you go to slice it. So pack it in there and let it cool to room temperature. Once it's cooled down, that's going to take about 45 minutes to an hour. You can transfer it onto your serving platter. I'm using this crystal platter over here because it looks pretty, but I've also displayed this on a cutting board just to make it nice and rustic. I love to garnish this with some ground pistachios. It gives it a nice little pop of color, but you can sprinkle some more cinnamon on top instead. This halva is just delicious. It smells good. It's nice and warm. And this from the spices of the cinnamon and the cloves. The lemon really brightens it up. Once you slice into it, you'll just see how soft it is. It's so good with a nice cup of coffee. Just look at how good this looks. So that's it. Just like that, the halva is ready. And this is basically a semolina pudding, but once it cools down and we make it the consistency that we made it, it looks like a cake. And that's why I love to put it in these bundt pans, because it just presents so beautifully, as you can see. I've also made it in smaller containers. I've put it into little trifle bowls and served it that way, individual servings. You can do so much with this. Go online and Google and you'll see all the beautiful ways people serve this halva. It's so good. If you're not making it for Lent, or if you're not worried about keeping it vegan, you can serve this with ice cream. It tastes so good with ice cream, some whipped cream. The options are just so many. But making this dessert, if you want to scale it up, there's a 1, 2, 3, 4 trick to it. If you remember that, you'll know that it's 1 part oil, 2 parts semolina flour, 3 parts sugar, and 4 parts water. That's the recipe for this basically. And you could just take that and make it as big or as small as you like. So if you want to keep this vegan, leave the cup of honey out and just substitute another cup of sugar for the honey. If you want to give it a little bit of a maple flavor, if you're making this maybe around the fall, maple syrup instead of honey works too. Of course, like I said, the fruit and the nuts can be swapped out for your favorites. I love the combination of pistachio and lemon because we already have lemon in it. If you want to, you can leave the almonds out and just substitute pistachios. Just chop them roughly. You don't have to grind them so small like the decoration is. I'm going to teach you how to make Koulourakia, but the vegan version. Koulourakia are classic Greek butter cookies that are usually made around Easter time, but around here we make them all year long because they're so good. They're perfect for dipping in coffee. And I'm teaching you how to make them without butter, without eggs, just using really good light olive oil to make them. They're going to be so good. They're so easy to make. Let's get started. Okay, so making this cookie batter is so simple. What we're going to begin with is the dry ingredients, so that way I don't have to switch to another whisk. In this bowl over here, I have 4 cups or 530 grams of all-purpose flour. I'll add 2 teaspoons of baking powder and whisk that all up. Now I'll set it aside and we're going to move on with the wet ingredients. So in this big mixing bowl here, I'll add 1.5 cups of very light olive oil. This is not the good quality cold pressed extra virgin olive oil because that will be too olivey tasting. This is a cookie, you want it to be nice and light. So I like to go with the light olive oil. You can use your favorite vegetable oil instead if you prefer. Next, I'll add 1 cup of granulated sugar, 3 teaspoons of pure vanilla extract, 1 cup of orange juice. You can use fresh or from the store, whatever you have. And I'll also add 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda to this. Whisk everything all together until it's nice and smooth. Then we're going to start adding the flour mixture a little bit at a time, whisking together so that way each batch is incorporated. It's going to look like almost like a pancake batter, but a little bit thicker. It does need to get thicker than this and drier, so I'll have some flour on hand and I'll just continue to add it until the mixture is no longer sticky and it forms a dough. The best way to add it is with your hands and just knead it as you go. Just try to not overwork the dough, but once it's at this consistency, when it's no longer sticky and it's not falling apart, that's how you know your dough is ready. But before you use it, it is a good idea to let it rest for a little bit. So cover it with a clean kitchen towel and just set it aside for 15 minutes. Okay, in order to shape the Koulourakia, we're going to first portion out the dough. So each ball of dough should weigh about 35 grams. It's about the size of a walnut. If you have a scale, just take it out and use it at this time. It's going to make your life so easy and it's going to help you keep them all uniform in size. If you don't, then it's fine. Then we're going to take one at a time, and the dough is, as you work with it, by the time you get to the last ones, there's going to be oil everywhere. These do release lots of oil, but don't worry about it. They're going to be so delicious. Squeeze the dough together to kind of help it hold its shape, and then roll it out into a rod that's between 6 to 8 inches long. If it starts to break on you, then it needs to be squeezed together a little bit more. And just do that, just bunch it back up and just squeeze it together and then roll it out again. Then I like to fold it in half like this and twist it so that way it looks like a braid or like a little rope. You can do so many different shapes with this. An S shape is also really common. So once you form it out into a rod, put it on a baking tray that's lined with parchment paper, and then you could form it into an S. You could also do it into little circles. Traditionally, these are sprinkled on the top with sesame seeds, but my kids don't like sesame, so I'm going to leave these plain. They're still going to be nice and beautiful to look at and still very delicious. But if you do want sesame on top, you can brush them with a little bit of simple syrup and then sprinkle the sesame on top. That'll add some more color and will also help the sesame seeds stick. It's up to you, but I'm leaving them without sesame seeds. And the twists are my favorite, so I'm going to make more twists than I am any other shape. They're all looking so good. These are unfortunately not cookies that kids are going to be able to help you with just because of how finicky they are with the releasing a lot of oil. They kind of break a lot, especially when you get towards the end. You might need a tiny bit more flour. I didn't add any flour. I just dealt with the oil problem because I wanted them to be nice and tender. The more flour you add to these cookies, the drier and tougher they become. So I'm going to leave it up to you how you're going to make them. Okay, so once you assemble the cookies and they're on parchment-lined baking trays, the oven should be preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And these are going to bake for about 20 to 25 minutes or until they're nice and golden. If you're baking more than one tray at a time, make sure to rotate them so that way they bake evenly. Once they're golden around the edges, they're ready. Take them out of the oven and let them sit at room temperature so that way they can cool down. Make some coffee in the meantime, call some friends over. I usually have freezer instructions for you for baked goods, but these cookies do not freeze well. But they do last long at room temperature, so it works out either way. And again, you saw how easy they are to make. The only thing is, if you follow me on my stories on Instagram, you'll see that I tried to make a gluten-free and vegan version of this. And I used King Arthur's 1-to-1 flour, the gluten-free flour, and it did not work at all. I did get a lot of messages from you guys with tips on how to make it work with gluten-free flour by adding some psyllium husk or some other ideas that you guys sent me. I didn't have time to test it out because they just came out so bad and I was so disappointed I didn't even feel like trying it. But if you do have tips on how to make them gluten-free, I'd love to hear it in the comments and maybe I'll give them a try one day. But these cookies as is taste so good. They are so flavorful because I put lots of vanilla in there, some orange. I stayed away from the cinnamon because I have lots of cinnamon in my Koulourakia recipe, which is almost identical to this minus the warm spices. If you do love that, you can put the warm spices in here, but I wanted to give more of the characteristic Koulourakia flavor to them, and that's why I left the cinnamon out, but they're so good. You can add some lemon zest to these too if you'd like and leave the orange out. Time for the taste test, and I'll take one of the little twists. Oh my goodness. So good. I love butter. I can eat butter on everything, but I don't miss the butter in these. There's so much flavor in them. They have the same texture as a regular Koulourakia does. And like I said, they're super easy to make. They'll keep fresh in a cookie jar or in an airtight container at room temperature for a week or two. They've never lasted that long for me to test the freshness, but they don't go bad because they don't have dairy in them. I'm going to be teaching you how to make the classic Spanakorizo. It's a spinach and rice pilaf that's made with loads of spinach, a little bit of rice and herbs. It's so good, and of course it's slightly lemony and refreshing. It's simple to make and goes good with literally everything. Let's get started. Okay, so we're going to begin with a red onion. I'm not going to use the whole thing because this is pretty big and I'm not making that big of a batch, but you can use the whole thing if you want more flavor. You're just going to go ahead and finely chop it and add it to the pot with lots of olive oil. You could add a 1/4 cup of olive oil or as much as your heart desires. Cook the onion over medium-low heat until it's nice and soft and translucent. You don't want to get any color on it. In the meantime, we'll cut up the garlic cloves. So I have 6 large garlic cloves here. I'll use the back of my knife and some pressure to just smash them up a little bit. That way the skin comes off easily, or the peel. And I'm just gonna slice the garlic up into rounds. I don't grate the garlic for this recipe because when the garlic cooks with the onion and then with the spinach, it's gonna soften up and mellow up, and it's just gonna add such good flavor. And this brings me back to childhood. The garlic pieces in the Spanakorizo have always been my favorite. I don't know if it's traditional, but that's how my mom makes it, and I've always made it that way. The onion is ready. It's already softened up quite a bit. I'll add the garlic in right now. And technically you could add the garlic at the beginning too, because it takes a little while for it to cook, probably around the same time that it takes the onion to cook. So I'm gonna let this go for another 4 or 5 minutes, or until the garlic is nice and soft as well. And then we're gonna add the spinach. So lots of spinach goes in this recipe. There's actually more spinach than rice in Spanakorizo. You can use 1.5 to 2 pounds of baby spinach leaves. I'm using 2 pounds today. So we'll add the spinach in a little bit at a time, seasoning each batch with a pinch of salt and freshly cracked black pepper. I'll increase the heat to medium-high so that way the spinach wilts quickly. Once all of the spinach is in there and it's nice and wilted, it's time to add the rice. I'm using arborio rice today. Carolina rice is a rice that's used in Greece for pilaffi, which is very similar to a risotto. So you can use arborio rice for this, or a medium grain rice, whatever you have on hand. We'll add the rice right now, some salt and some freshly cracked black pepper. Since I'm adding 1/2 cup of rice, I'll add 1/2 teaspoon of salt to this, and then 1 cup of water. As soon as the mixture heats up and comes to a boil, I'll reduce the heat to low, put the lid on, and this is gonna cook for about 15 minutes until the rice starts to soften and become nice and tender. I'll also finally chop some fresh dill. Dill is almost a must in Spanakorizo. If you don't like it, you can substitute parsley instead, but I love the dill in here. You want a nice big tablespoon of it once you're done chopping up the dill really finely. The dill is gonna go in the Spanakorizo with a little bit of lemon juice, fresh lemon juice always. And then just to add some depth of flavor, I'll add 1/2 teaspoon of dried mint. Fresh mint would do too. Just mix it all up and just let this simmer for another 4 or 5 minutes, and then it's ready to serve. You can also drizzle some more olive oil into the pot, or you can serve this drizzled with olive oil onto your plate, some fresh lemon juice, of course some feta cheese, and it is ready to eat. Okay, so just like that, it's ready. And as you see, there's more spinach in this than rice, and that's how a classic Spanakorizo is. I have shared a recipe with a lighter version that has more rice than spinach. It's more like a pilaf than this. This is made this way to be served more as a main course. It comes from the category in Greek foods known as ladera, which are olive oil based dishes, which are usually vegetarian or vegan, and they're served as a main course, and there's so many veggies in them. That's how this is traditionally made. But if you want to learn how to make the other version, which has some more rice in it, and I make it with basmati rice, and more of like for a side, you can click down below and I'll put the link down there so you could watch that recipe if you haven't already. This smells so good, I have to taste it. And I want to make sure I get a garlic, because that's the best part. It's creamy and it melts in your mouth, and it's just so lemony and good. I like to serve this with some feta cheese and lemon wedges on the side, lots of toasted hearty bread just to soak up all that olive oil and those juices. And we're making falafel. Now you can make the falafel and make them into sandwiches like we're gonna make them today. You can put them on a salad bowl, over rice, over zucchini noodles. You could really dress them up any which way you want. They're crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, aromatic from all of the herbs, and just downright delicious. Let's get started. So you're gonna wanna make sure that you soak uncooked raw chickpeas overnight. This is the only step that requires a little bit of prep work. You just put the chickpeas in a bowl and you cover them with water by a few inches. The next morning, they're gonna have plumped up a little bit and they're gonna be ready to use. I'm gonna go ahead and drain out this water. So go ahead and add 6 to 8 cloves of garlic in the food processor and pulse them until they're minced. Next, I have 2 bunches of parsley that I've soaked in cold water, then I drain them. I'm just gonna cut the leaves off, the edges, just like that. Try to get as many of them off as I can. And you could save the stems, the thicker stems, for soups and stocks. They flavor them really beautifully. Or if you have a little garden, you could put them in the compost pile, whatever you want. And we're gonna pulse this until they're finely minced. Next, I have an onion, and I'm just gonna cut it into quarters. And that's also gonna go in the food processor and get minced. And this is what that mixture should look like. At this point, I'm going to add probably half or 3/4 of the chickpeas, more like half because I don't want to stress the mixer and then have it break on me. And I'll just do this in 2 batches. I'm going to pulse these until they're very finely minced as well. But at this point, I'm also going to add some seasoning in here. I'm going to do 1 teaspoon of salt for this batch, and I'm going to add more salt later on. Ground cumin seeds, I'm going to do 2 teaspoons. A heaping teaspoon of ground coriander. A teaspoon of baking soda. This is going to make it nice and soft. Some crushed red pepper flakes. Ground black pepper, as much as you like. This is half a teaspoon. And I'm also going to add a tablespoon of all-purpose flour. This is going to help them stay together. And this looks good right now. You don't want it to turn into a paste. You want it to be very finely minced, just like this. I'm going to transfer this to a bowl. You can leave some of that in there. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then I'm going to add the remaining chickpeas with another teaspoon of salt. And I'll do another tablespoon of all-purpose flour and pulse until everything is nice and minced. And just mix everything up really well. If you have a bigger food processor, you can do this all in one batch. Mine is an 11 cup, so anything bigger than that would have fit everything all together in one batch. But you can do this in smaller batches too. It's up to you. And I'm going to switch to my hands. Now, as long as it holds together, let's see. Just like this is holding together, it's not falling apart. Then the mixture is good to go. If it's starting to fall apart on you, you can put another tablespoon of all-purpose flour in here until it holds together. At this point, the best thing to do is to let it sit for about an hour or 2 so all of the flavors can mesh and meld together. But if you're making it as a weeknight meal, obviously you don't have that much time, so you can definitely form the falafel into either patties or into little meatball-sized round balls. I like to do it that way, but if you're baking them, then form them into patties and then you can bake them in the oven, but I like to fry them. So we're just gonna go on and make this right now, but if you do have time, you can definitely set it aside for an hour or 2 and they're gonna taste even better. I'm gonna clean this area up, get the oil nice and hot, and then we're gonna start making them. So while the oil is warming up, we're just gonna quickly make some quick pickled onions, and I've done this in a previous video before. Basically what you do is you just thinly slice an onion, preferably into half moons like this. And I like to use red onions for this if you can find them. Go ahead and get them in a bowl with a nice big pinch of salt or 2. And then you pour some red wine vinegar over them, about a 1/4 cup or more. You could go up to a 1/2 cup. And then just toss everything. And that's it. We're going to set this aside, and once the falafel are ready, these are going to bring so much flavor to the sandwich. And since we're waiting for the oil to heat up, we're going to make the little salad that's going to go in the sandwich. And I'm going to begin with these little cucumbers. You could use 1 large English cucumber instead of these small ones. I'm going to peel them first and then dice them. So go ahead and add all the cucumbers to the bowl. Then I have these mini bell peppers, but you can totally use 1 large bell pepper. And then just slice that as well. Just get all those seeds out and thinly slice it. And go ahead, add the bell peppers to the bowl. And then last but not least, I have these small little grape tomatoes. I'm just going to cut them in half and add those to the bowl as well. So I'm just going to drizzle a couple tablespoons of really good quality olive oil on top of the salad. And I'm going to season with a little bit of salt. Give it a nice mix. You can put some mint in here, dried oregano, whatever herbs you like, but I'm just going to keep it plain. And just like that, the salad is done. So now it's time to form the falafel, and I like to use a little mini ice cream scoop for this. And I just like to take a scoop of the mixture and put it in my palm and press it together until we form a little meatball-sized falafel, just like this, a little ball. Put it on a baking tray and keep forming them as we go. So when I have about 7 or 8 formed, I'm going to start frying them. The oil needs to be at 375 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to keep forming these because the oil still needs about 10-15 degrees left to be ready, so I might as well just keep making these. So once the oil reaches 375 degrees Fahrenheit, they're ready to be put in. Now I like to have one of these big spider strainers ready because it makes it really safe to get the falafel into the hot oil. And get them in there really carefully. And don't put too many in there, depending on the size of your pan. In this one, I like to put around 6 or 7 in at a time. And keep in mind that the first batch will be a little bit darker than the remaining batches because the oil is going to be really hot. Once you start frying the falafel, the temperature of the oil is going to drop a little bit, and they're going to get that beautiful golden color that you're looking for. So it takes about 4 minutes for the falafel to be ready. You want to make sure that you flip them over a few times so they're nice and even all around. Then have a tray ready that's lined with some paper towels to absorb the oil once you transfer the fried falafel onto the tray. It's just going to be so delicious. So while the falafel is frying, you can continue to form the rest of them if you haven't already done so. That way everything gets ready, gets prepared together. So the first batch is out. I'm going to continue frying these until they're all done. Then we're going to make a little sauce that's going to go with this, toast some bread, and put the whole thing together. So the falafel are ready. Now I'm going to make a little sauce for this. I like to serve this with my shawarma sauce. So in this bowl, I have a little over a cup of plain yogurt. This is not Greek yogurt, it's plain yogurt, with about 1/4 cup of mayonnaise. I'm going to grate a clove of garlic in here. You can do 2 cloves if you want a little extra kick. And about 2 tablespoons of lemon juice should be good to freshen it up. Just mix this all up. And I'm just going to switch to a whisk because the mayonnaise isn't really incorporating and I want this sauce to be really nice and smooth. The sauce is really nice and smooth and it's nice and pourable of the perfect consistency. Now it's time to put everything all together. So now it's time to put it all together, and if you'll notice, the falafel is beautifully golden on the outside. And let me pick up this one right here and show you what it looks like on the inside. It's green, it's vibrant, and the outside, like I said, is crisp, but the inside should be nice and soft and almost juicy and loaded with flavor. We're going to try it in a few seconds. Over here, I have my fillings for my sandwich, and I'm going to make a sandwich with some pita bread. But you can definitely make this low carb or lower carb by serving it over a salad, or if you want to serve it with some rice. Really, the sky's the limit. You could even make these as appetizers for a party. It's a meal, an appetizer, really whatever you want. I'm going to put the instructions on how to bake these if you wanted to bake them instead of frying them. If you were going to bake them instead of forming them into rounds, you would form them into patties and then bake them either in the oven or in an air fryer. And those instructions are going to be on the blog post. But before we move on and I forget, make sure that you don't substitute already canned cooked chickpeas for this. You are going to have to use fresh, uncooked chickpeas. Otherwise, the canned ones fall apart once you start to fry them. It's just not going to work in this recipe. One more thing, if you want to make these gluten-free and leave out the flour, of course you can use a gluten-free alternate flour, or you can boil and mash a potato and put it in the mixture, and it'll hold everything together beautifully, leaving out the flour for those of us who are sensitive to the flour. Now let's put the sandwich together. I toasted a pita bread, and I like to layer everything in. I like to put the salad in to make a nice layer. These pickled onions are going to be nice and tangy and vinegary and so good. Over here, I have some harissa sauce. I do have the recipe for this online, so make sure you check it out. If you add all different flavors, it's just going to be delicious. So I'm going to put some harissa in here. It's a little bit spicy too. Then I'm going to get the falafel. I'll put 2 of them in here. So at this point, the sandwich is completely vegan, but I love this sauce, so I am going to drizzle it in a heavy, heavy amount because I love shawarma sauce. Look at how pretty that is. Who would not want to eat that for dinner? Time to take a bite. That is the best falafel sandwich that I've ever had. So much flavor in it. The falafel is very crisp, like I said. All those herbs in there make it taste absolutely delicious. That harissa adds a little bit of a kick. The sauce is nice and creamy. The onions are a little bit vinegary and just so delicious. Everything all together, you guys are gonna love it. I have a delicious Lent recipe for you because it's vegan and it's loaded with nutrition and so good. It's my black-eyed peas with spinach and fennel soup. Such a simple soup to make, comes together in under an hour. Let's get started. Okay, we're gonna begin with a pound of black-eyed peas. These are dried beans. If you can find them canned, then you can skip this step. But we have to soak them overnight in some cold water. Just cover them really well because they tend to absorb the water. In the morning, you can just drain that water out and transfer the beans to a pot. Cover them with plenty of water. I don't add salt to them or anything like that. Bring it to a boil. Once it comes to a boil, then reduce it to a medium and then let them cook for about 20 to 25 minutes or until they're tender. Then you want to strain them out, get rid of all that water and set them aside while we prepare all the remaining ingredients. I have 1 onion that's finely chopped. I'll add it to my pot over here with lots of olive oil. Cook it until it's nice and soft and golden, and then add 2 to 3 garlic cloves that are grated and just warm them through until they're nice and fragrant. This is what fennel looks like. We're going to use the fronds, which almost look like dill, and the bulb that's on the bottom. First, we're going to remove the stems and cut the end off, and then I'm just going to chop this up just like I did the onion, set it aside, and then I'll finally chop about 2 tablespoons of the fronds and set those aside. Next, we're going to add the finely chopped fennel, and then I'm just going to toss it around in the oil for a few minutes. Then I'll add 1 pound of baby spinach leaves. You could add them all at the same time, and as soon as they wilt down, they don't have to wilt down completely because they're going to continue to cook in the soup, but as soon as they cook down, you can season them with a little bit of salt and freshly cracked black pepper. Then we'll add the cooked beans. I also like to add 1 can, a 15-ounce can of tomato sauce. This is lightly seasoned with a little bit of salt and just a tiny pinch of sugar. There aren't too many seasonings in it. You can use crushed tomatoes or even diced tomatoes that have been pureed. I'm going to season it with some salt and freshly cracked black pepper, some crushed red pepper flakes, and then about 4 cups of vegetable broth. You can add water to this instead if you like, and you want to make sure there's enough liquid in here. So even though I added the 4 cups, it seems like it will need a little bit more liquid, so I'll just top it off with 1 or 2 more cups of water. If you have more vegetable broth, you can pour that in here if you'd like. Give everything a nice mix. Bring it to a boil, and once it comes to a boil, reduce the heat to a medium-low, and you can cover the pot loosely with a little crack open so that way nothing spills out or boils over, and let this cook for about 25 minutes or until everything comes together. Give it a taste and see if it needs more salt or pepper, and then we'll add the fennel fronds to this and a little pinch of mint. I like to add dried mint to this. A half teaspoon will really freshen it up. If you don't like the mint, you can leave it out and you can add some fresh parsley instead or some dried oregano. As the soup sits, it's going to thicken a little bit more, but it's ready to serve with some nice toasted bread. So just like that, the soup is ready. I would definitely make a bigger batch of this if you're making it because it takes the same amount of time and it freezes beautifully. It also keeps fresh in the fridge for many days, which makes it perfect for meal prep. And again, it's so comforting and cozy and delicious. Once you bite into it, you're going to see how fresh it tastes. First of all, it's very hearty because of all those black-eyed peas in there. The spinach adds a little level of creaminess. The fennel is nice and bright, and you can definitely squeeze some lemon on top just to brighten it up a little bit more. You can print out the exact recipe on the website, dimitrasdishes.com. I would just serve this with some toasted bread, and it's good to go. I hope you guys enjoy this one. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below, and I'll see you back here next time with another delicious recipe. Yes, us.